This is a significant year. We commemorate SG60, also MOE70, also NIE75. It is timely for us to reflect, look back on how our education system came to be, and to look ahead to envision how it will and must be. The late 1940s marked the beginning of our education system. I use the word system because prior to this, it would be more appropriate to describe what we had as our education landscape, which developed organically, but not necessarily intentionally. After World War II in 1947, the colonial government laid out a 10-year program, the first, with guiding principles including equal access to education and inculcating civic loyalty and responsibility. Singapore achieved independence in 1965, but our survival was not a given. If we did survive, it would be against the odds. Our education system would be key to Singapore's success and survival as a nation. The pioneers of Singapore were convinced that we needed a unified education system that would achieve three goals. First, ensure that our people had the skills to find jobs to upkeep and uplift our families, without which our country would break apart and fail. Next, to foster cohesion and harmony amidst simmering racial tensions then, and foster a nascent Singapore identity. In the early years, our pioneer had to confront three very immediate and immense challenges. First, our education infrastructure threatened to buckle under the weight of a growing population. There was a critical shortage of schools. Many had been damaged or destroyed during the war. Teachers were in short supply. At the same time, it was estimated that from 1954 to 1959, the total number of students in the primary age group would increase by over 100,000. These capacity constraints were compounded by the large number of overage students returning to school after their education was disrupted by the war. Our second challenge was that the education system was split along language fault lines. Schools were classified by their language of instructions. We had Chinese, English schools, Malay schools, and Tamil schools. Each language stream had its own separate curriculum and examination requirements. Without intervention, we faced the possibility of raising generations of disparate groups of citizens with different worldviews who could only communicate with those in their own language stream. In addition, command of English was increasingly required for the new jobs. But in 1959, half of our students were in vernacular schools. They had little opportunity to learn how to read or write in English. Third, the quality of education across schools varied widely. The education system was fragmented. Besides being split by language streams, schools were provided for by various organizations, including racial and religious groups, clan associations, and the colonial government. Of the three problems, the most pressing problem was capacity. Our greatest priority of this phase was to ensure a place for every child in our school. The first two terms of government saw almost a third of the national budget devoted to education. Between 1959 to 1968, MOE built an average of one school a month. MOE also introduced double sessions in schools in 1957. I had experienced this myself. My primary school had only 3 classes for my cohort, but we were split into 2 sessions, and we alternated between the morning sessions and the afternoon sessions. If you were in the morning session, you could be rest assured that your teacher could not punish you by having you stay back in class. If you were in the afternoon session, the teachers would certainly not detain you after class either, because they would want to go home before it got dark. Anyway, for most of us, staying in school was a privilege, not a punishment, as most of our homes were not as conducive compared to our rudimentary schools. To address the shortage of trained teachers, the Teachers Training College was established in 1950, the predecessors of today's NIE. The issue of the language fault line in our education system would not be so easily resolved. To bridge the divide in our multiracial and multicultural context, the government made a tough but necessary decision to implement a bilingualism policy in 1960, which made learning English compulsory in primary schools and subsequently in secondary schools in 1966. Students in vernacular schools had to study English as a second language, while those in English schools had to learn an additional language. This was not an easy decision. English was not the vernacular for most students at that time. There was also a shortage of trained English teachers. The shift towards a single, unified system could not be rushed. We had to let time, economics, and parental choice take its course. It took a generation to shift mindsets, but over time, parents saw that job prospects were more favorable for students who could speak English and made the choice for their children accordingly to place them in English schools. By 1984, the P1 enrollment in non-English medium classes had declined to less than 1% of the cohort. Only then did the government move to standardize the medium of instruction in education to English, which was completed only in 1987. Even then, the transition was not easy. Non-English language teachers were most impacted and had to be reskilled. Only the best Chinese medium schools, the special assistance plan schools, were preserved, where students could take both English and Chinese as a first language. The third problem of quality was also not easily resolved. MOE had to initiate moves to unify the system. In 1959, the earliest efforts to develop a harmonized national curriculum began. The newly appointed Education Advisory Council began putting together a common school syllabus for use in all schools. Then in 1960, the PSLE was introduced. So incidentally, this year is also PSLE 65. This provided a common certification across all 4 language streams, which ensure equal opportunity to progress educationally. However, as capacity rapidly grew and changes were quickly implemented, quality inevitably suffered. While most children of primary schooling age were in schools, around 29% of the P1 cohort from 1971 to 1974 did not complete primary school, almost 1 in 3. A further 36% did not complete secondary school, which meant that only 35% completed secondary school. And of that 35%, only 4% went to university and 5% to polytechnic equivalents or the Institute of Education. The rest went directly to the workforce. The lack of literacy was also an issue. At that time, many students still spoke dialects at home. In 1975, at least a quarter of primary 6 students in both the Chinese and English streams did not meet the minimum literacy levels for primary 6. We had national servicemen who were supposedly graduates from our education system who were known as Hokkien Peng, who could only communicate in Hokkien. Some of us in the audience may remember this, that in the past, the servicemen wore different colored tags, name tags, to indicate the languages they spoke. Red for Hokkien, orange for Chinese, green for English, blue for Malay, and yellow for Tamil. And then there's a special color, purple. Any guess who wore the purple tags? The purple tags were reserved for servicemen who did not speak any of the above languages that I mentioned. Not English, Chinese, Malay, Tamil, or even Hokkien. Then you have a purple tag. When I was a young SAF officer, I could still find training manuals in Hokkien. And many of our most memorable military marching cadence songs were in Hokkien. You can look it up in YouTube today. Now, although the problems of language fault line and quality remain, by the 1970s, we had at least overcome the issue of capacity and access to education was widespread. The enrollment in primary schools had increased by about 30% from around 270,000 in 1959 to around 350,000 in 1972. For secondary education, the growth was even more impressive. The enrollment in secondary schools had more than tripled from around 48,000 in 1959 to around 160,000 in 1972. Industrialization enabled many well-paying jobs to be created for employment. Singaporeans did not have to go overseas to find jobs, unlike people in many other countries. We were also able to withstand the pull-out of the British forces in 1971. British bases then accounted for 20% of our GDP and more than 30,000 jobs. My own maternal grandparents were working for the British forces in Sembawang, and they lost their jobs and livelihoods overnight when the British announced their withdrawal. From 1960 to 1975, Singapore's real GDP increased by around 4 times. The unemployment rate was also halved, from around 8.9% in 1966 to around 4.5% in 1975. But as our schools began to take in students across various backgrounds with varying levels of ability, the problems of the language fault line and quality became more pronounced. Global competition was also intensifying. Other countries had much larger populations and could offer lower wages to entice investors. To secure our economic growth in the longer term and raise our people's salaries, we had to adopt new strategies by moving up the value chain into more capital and skill-intensive industries. There was, hence, an urgent need to increase the quality of our workers' skills to prepare them for success in the new jobs created here. Against this backdrop, in 1979, a new system engineering team led by then DPM Goh Keng Swee produced a groundbreaking report known as the GO Report, which proposed fundamental structural changes to our education system. The report laid the foundations for a new education system, one that sought to cater to the diverse linguistic and academic abilities of our students. The key issue was how to reduce the dropout rate and improve the quality of our education system. This second phase was marked by the recognition that a one-size-fits-all approach to the education system would no longer be adequate. If we had hoped to unlock the full potential of our diverse population, we would have to cater to the students of different needs, strengths, and aptitudes. Our education system had to become customized for varieties of talents and strengths. A key recommendation of Dr. Goh's report was streaming, where students would be grouped into different courses depending on their language proficiencies and academic abilities. This allowed schools to meet students where they were and foster an environment in which they could reach their potential. Those who were less academically inclined could learn at a more measured pace and focus on gaining a strong foundation in English, math, and technical subjects to prepare them for vocational training. Those who were more academically inclined and had strong linguistic abilities could learn at an accelerated pace and perhaps even a third language. However, streaming was not easy and not without its critics. When it was first proposed, it was the subject of a 4-day parliamentary debate. There were concerns that streaming would lead to unintended stigmatization. These concerns would persist in later years. But streaming did make a tremendous difference to the quality of education. Performance visibly improved in just a few years. The percentage of students failing to complete primary school fell from 28% to 8% with the first batch of P6 students who underwent streaming. The percentage of students with 3 or more O-level passes rose from 60% in pre-streaming years to nearly 90% by 1985, just 6 years after streaming was introduced. To further support students at every part of the academic ability spectrum, other targeted initiatives were implemented. Take, for example, the Gifted Education Program in 1984 and the Learning Support Program in 1992. The Institute of Technical Education, or ITE, was also established in 1992 to take over the functions of the VITB, or Vocational and Industry Training Board. It served as a post-secondary institute, providing new paths for those who were more inclined towards vocational training. To match these ambitious changes, we had to make concurrent efforts to further support our educators. In 1973, the Teachers Training College was revamped to become the Institute of Education. The newly established institute provided pedagogical training to prospective teachers, conducted courses for existing teachers, and undertook pedagogical research. It also began offering a diploma in education for graduates on top of existing certificate courses for non-graduates. The institute was eventually merged with the College of Physical Education to form NIE in 1991. Now, phase 3. By the late 1990s, this move had borne fruit. In 1995, the trends in international mathematics and science study, or what we call TIMSS, reported that Singaporean students in secondary 1 and 2 were the top among 45 countries in mathematics and science. Singaporean students were also achieving top ranks in international mathematics and science Olympiads. Our students had also access to high-quality post-secondary education in ITE, polytechnics, and universities. But the world was rapidly changing, bringing about new challenges and opportunities that would reshape our vision of education and work. The rise of the internet increased connectivity and competition, and it also commoditized knowledge. The defeat of a world chess champion by IBM's Deep Blue system in 1997 signaled a new era of rapid technological developments where human intelligence would be complemented and perhaps risk being supplanted by machines and algorithms. Those who could apply these new technologies and innovate faster would get a leg up in the global race. The Thinking Schools Learning Nation reforms introduced in 1997 marked the beginning of the third phase of our education system. The texture of the education system would see greater customization to meet the needs of the individual. Rather than categorizing students into narrow academic boxes, we will move towards recognizing and developing them holistically beyond just the academics. Led by then Minister for Education, Teo Chee Hean, we push for greater customization for different learner profiles to make learning more varied and enriching. We move away from a focus on students knowing their factual content to sharpening their ability to distill and discern information. We realized an overemphasis on academics had led to a narrowing of the notion of success in a time when we critically needed a diversity of strengths. A new curriculum policy framework was developed in 1998 to support more holistic curriculum. One of the key pillars of this framework was thinking skills and creativity. To create time for more creative teaching and independent learning, we reduced curriculum's content by an average of 24% over a period of 8 years. The first Information Technology Master Plan was also launched in 1997 to guide adoption of technology in education. It was one of the first in the world to provide students and teachers in all schools access to computers. You all may not know what you are looking at the picture. Those are old computers. The only thing that's similar now is the keyboard. The rest of you might still remember what is a 5-inch floppy disk. Only the people in front say, hey. We also began creating more open and diverse pathways in the education system. The structured system with every student going methodically through the O-levels and the A-levels had worked well. However, some students could benefit from less structure. Students who could be sure to pass the O-levels could benefit from using the time spent preparing for the exam to instead learn at a more demanding level. There were also students whose talents and interests lay in more specific areas like in science, maths, and sports. Their unique abilities and aspirations were not as well served in the old system. We began to introduce different programs and school types to cater to a greater variety of abilities and aspirations. The integrated program was introduced in 2004. We also set up specialized independent schools like NUS High School of Math and Science and Singapore Sports Schools, and specialized schools like Northlight and Spectra Secondary School. The blueprint for autonomous universities was also mooted, and applied universities like SIT and SUSS were established. We believe a more variegated system would nurture a more diverse pool of talent. Singaporeans with different education experiences befitting their talents and inclinations would naturally have different outlooks, thus making Singapore more vibrant and resilient because of our diversity of perspectives. These moves were also complemented by fundamental system-level changes to empower both educators and schools. Together, these shifts changed the trajectory of our education system. At the turn of the 1990s, the education service faced a reckoning. Experienced teachers were burned out from staying in the same post year on year. Young teachers were leaving in droves. Few wanted to become teachers, and the talent pipeline was diminishing. The Education Service Review Committee, chaired by then Permanent Secretaries Lim Siong Guan and Co-Chair Siang, made substantial changes to address these problems. They increased educators' salaries to make them more competitive, introduced new roles like senior teacher, and elevated a principal's job grade to super skill, which pegged the standing of our educators to that of key public service leadership positions. In 2001, a new 3-track career structure for educators were introduced, consisting of the leadership track, the teaching track, and the specialist track. It was the first of its kind in the world. It signaled that teaching was a multifaceted profession with diverse peaks of excellence. These changes aim to create more deliberate progression pathways for educators to recognize and reward them across various domains of expertise. Progression to school leadership was not and could not be seen as the only pathway to success. Our career advancement tracks for educators continue to be one of the most well-developed career ladder structures in the teaching profession globally today. Schools were also granted greater autonomy to deploy their resources to best meet the needs of their educators and students. The cluster system was introduced in 1997, organizing schools into geographical groups, overseen by cluster superintendents, devolving some authority to each cluster not only freed up bandwidth for the system, but also created the right conditions for schools to collaborate with one another to share resources and ideas. EduSave grants were made available to schools. They could then decide how best to allocate these funds, which meant that schools could develop niche areas according to their strengths, cultures, and convictions. MOE also implemented the School Excellence Model in 2000, essentially a quality assurance framework for schools. It empowers schools to take charge of their own learning and improvement. In more recent years, we continue to strengthen holistic education and diverse pathways. The Enhanced 21st Century Competencies, or 21CC as we call it, was launched in 2023 to place greater emphasis on adaptive and inventive thinking, communications, and civic literacy. The PSLE T-score was replaced by the achievement level system in 2021 to reduce fine differentiation of exam results at a young age and recognize a student's level of achievement regardless of how his or her peers had performed. Just last year, we fully implemented subject-based banding, replacing the old system of streaming. Students can now take different subjects at different levels according to their unique abilities and interests in those subjects. If you like, it was not really the end of streaming, but refinement of streaming by subject, transcending the previous model of teaching to the average of an individual's diverse abilities. We are also reviewing the gifted education program to better recognize the unique potential of students, allowing for greater porosity across their learning journeys and to discourage hot housing. Likewise, we are reviewing direct school admission, or DSA, to strengthen accessibility for more students. The number of government and community-funded special education, or SPED schools, has also grown, with the total number of SPED schools increased to 27 by 2030. Programs like the Leadership Development Program and Communities of Practice for Educators announced last year will also strengthen the SPED sector. But very importantly, we now take on a life cycle approach to our investment in education by strengthening both the preschool foundations and lifelong learning. The Early Childhood Development Agency, jointly overseen by MOE and MSF, was formed in 2013, when I was in MSF, and now I'm back in MOE this side, to oversee the preschool sector. To further catalyze quality improvements in the sector, MOE set up our own MOE kindergartens and the NIEC. The Skills Future movement was launched in 2015 the first nationwide effort to promote lifelong learning. It set us apart from other countries which traditionally focus on learning only in the foundational years. Over time, we have added more initiatives under the SkillsFuture umbrella. In 2023 alone, more than 500,000 individuals, or 20% of our working population, and 23,000 employers benefited from the SkillsFuture initiatives. Now the question is, where do we need to go? The strong foundations laid by previous generations of educators have allowed us to make steady progress over the decades. Today, we have a system that is functioning and performing well. We were the top performing education system worldwide across reading, mathematics, and science for the PISA test in 2022. Our students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds also perform better than their peers in the OECD countries. Indeed, they perform better than the overall OECD average. Hence, no surprise that Singaporeans are in demand across the world. Many other countries, as well as foreign universities, have been beneficiaries of the high educational base we have in Singapore. But as we look ahead to the future, we must be clear-eyed about both the opportunities that our high education base gives us and the potential pitfalls that lie ahead. The global trends we faced in the early 2000s remain relevant, but they have taken on a new form. The proliferation of social media opened the Pandora's box of confirmation bias, echo chambers, and misinformation, which threatens to polarize societies. Beyond just being able to distill information, learning to discern truth, quality and relevance has become more critical. Technology has also developed rapidly. AI has now become more easily accessible. And now, all of us can access AI tools from our own personal smartphones. If our people can adapt and make the most of these technologies, we will punch above our weight. But if we fail to ride this wave, we risk getting leapfrogged by other countries and will be left behind. Many countries and companies are already using the latest technology, data science, and AI tools to try to overcome their lack of quality teaching resources and to disrupt conventional teaching and learning methods. We should similarly embrace these new tools and see how we can use them judiciously and appropriately to uplift different segments of our student populations with different needs. Lastly, while the world remains ever more connected, the winds of unbridled globalization have weakened. Now we see a rising tide of protectionism as countries seek to shield themselves from an increasingly uncertain and volatile world. As a small city-state, we cannot afford to close ourselves off. We must reach out and work doubly hard to build partnerships across the world. We must also guard against complacency on one hand and over-pressurizing our students on the other. Tests like those run by OECD measure abilities that we know are valuable today, but they cannot measure emerging abilities and skills that might be needed in the future. Even as we strive to help our students realize their fullest potential, we must guard against a narrow focus on grades and hot housing in schooling years, which will quash curiosity and a love for learning. We also need to move away from the focus on internal relativities. The real test is not whether our students surpass one another in the first 15 years in schools, but whether they will keep surpassing themselves in the next 50 years when they are no longer with us in the schools. The results of the recent OECD program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies, or PIAC, show that we must work hard to counter atrophy of our literacy and numeracy skills, just like many others. We must also act swiftly to help our older generations who had fewer opportunities to catch up and keep pace with the fast-evolving demands of the new economic realities. Our predecessors have passed the baton to us, and very soon, all of you seated in the audience, you will take on the leadership role of our education system. We cannot rest on our laurels. We have worked in the past. What has worked in the past may not continue to do so in the future. We need to be obsessed with the future and what it will demand of our students and us. Thankfully, we are much better resourced now with dedicated teachers who are better trained than ever before. As of 2023, we have around 30,000 teachers, which is 25% higher than the 24,000 we had the year 2000. Student enrollment, however, was around 420,000 in 2023, a reduction of 17% from around the 505,000 in the year 2000. Our pupil-to-teacher ratios today are comparable to the OECD average and countries such as the UK and Germany. Then the challenge for us is how best to deploy our resources so that we can do the best for every child. So what will our students need to thrive in this era of increasing uncertainty, volatility, and fragmentation? First, the ability to create new value propositions. Our students cannot just answer yesterday's questions with yesterday's answers. They need to ask tomorrow's questions and find tomorrow's answers ahead of time. Second, the ability to connect and build bridges. Singapore's strength has historically been our connectivity and our ability to attract and network with the best from across the world. In a more fragmented world, characterized by deepening social fault lines and powerful polarizing forces, the ability to embody multiculturalism, build partnerships, and bridge differences will be our competitive advantages. The ability to hone, appreciate, and draw upon a diversity of strengths. We must shift away from traditional narrow notions of success and stop comparing ourselves with one another. We must recognize the integral role that each individual plays in society. From the cooks who keep our hawker culture alive, to the artists, content creators, and musicians who fuel our creativity, to the sportsmen and women who represent Singapore on the global stage. Success is about being the best version of ourselves and contributing what we can to society. Multiple pathways of success is not and cannot be simply a slogan. Everyone must have the chance to fulfill his or her unique potential. And everyone must be inspired to make a contribution to the bigger good beyond taking care of themselves and their families. Our competition is never internal. Rather, it is about how Team Singapore can build the most talented networks, both internally and externally, to compete with stronger, larger, and better endowed systems across the world. How will we achieve this? We will do so through two structural shifts, which have already been in progress for some years now. First, we will continue to support greater customization of education to meet diverse abilities, needs, interests, and aspirations. We will do so by supporting diverse pathways, embracing new mindsets on what and how we teach and learn, and leveraging technology to overcome the conventional dilemma in education systems across the world and across history. And that dilemma that we have to break is how to achieve quality, scale, and at affordable costs. In most conventional systems, you can at best have two out of the three. If you have quality and scale, chances are that it's not affordable. If you have quality and it's affordable, chances are that you can't scale. If you can scale and it's affordable, chances are that the quality is not very high. But today, in the first time in history, I think we have the chance to break this trilemma. We must transcend teaching to the average of a class. In an ideal future, we will be able to leverage AI and data science to customize lessons according to the unique needs of our individual student, to create, in effect, a class size of one. Second, as a society, we must embrace learning beyond schools and books. Laying the foundations for self-motivated learning and growth starts from young. As an education system, we must resist the urge to over-provide, over-structure, and over-protect. The school cannot be our world. Instead, the world should be our school. We will also continue pushing ahead with our efforts to foster a spirit of lifelong learning, to embrace the joy of learning and encourage people to continue to pick up new skills that are relevant to their future even after leaving school. We will also need to better understand the science of teaching and learning for adults, just as NIE and NIEC have done for the school and preschool children respectively. These shifts must be complemented by continued efforts to upskill and support our teaching force, to help them meet those more complex demands, and teaching has never been just the didactic transmission of knowledge. Instead, our educators must guide students to discover themselves, nurture their social-emotional development, and impart important life skills such as mastering technology meaningfully, critical thinking, connecting with others, using technology purposefully, and even making career choices to contribute to the betterment of the world. These require skills beyond what can be taught in a classroom. This is why we roll out programs like the Teachers Work Attachment Plus program, or TWA Plus, which provides opportunities for educators to gain exposure from different sectors and industries outside our school system, both private and public. But we must go further. Professional development must continue to be a deliberate consideration when planning the deployment of our educators and not simply as an afterthought. But we are also realistic that our educators cannot be au fait with all the latest trends in the market. This is why we need to partner industry, community, and parents to leverage on their strengths and to complement our teaching capabilities and capacity. Even as we make structural shifts, bilingualism must remain a cornerstone of our education system. In a time of increasing fragmentation, bilingualism and multilingualism is the key to helping Singapore build bridges across a more fragmented world. Its value is not simply in having the ability to communicate. Language opens the window to a deeper understanding of the cultural nuances and how people think, their motivations, perspectives, and worldviews. More fundamentally, bilingualism goes to the core of our Singaporean identity. It goes beyond encouraging our people to use multiple languages in everyday life. It marks our commitment to stay connected to our rich and distinct cultural heritage. Today, English has become the dominant language for most Singaporean homes. We must redouble our efforts to strengthen bilingualism. It will be difficult, but an important challenge that we must overcome in the next bound. Now, tackling all these challenges will not be easy, but we need to go all in on our education system. As our next generation of educators, you will have an important role to play in realizing the future of our education system and, in turn, shape the future of Singapore. Thankfully, we are not starting from scratch. Looking back on the history of our education system, I have the following reflections to share for our continued success. First, we must maintain our pursuit of excellence while upholding an open, continuous, and compassionate meritocracy. We cannot be satisfied with good enough. Each of us must strive to fulfill our fullest potential, be in academics or any other field. We must distinguish the pursuit of excellence in context from the pursuit of perfection without context, which risks irrelevance. Clinging onto static and outdated notions of success because we are unwilling to jettison what has worked well in the past will seal our fates. In an uncertain and evolving world, it is more important to do the right things well than just to do the same thing well. Even as we work to realize each individual's fullest potential, we must be intentional in fostering inclusion and mixing in our educational policies. In our pursuit of excellence through meritocracy, we must guard against becoming an inheritocracy of privileges. Our policies must constantly evolve to balance our goals for societal mobility and cohesion. Second, we must be discerning as we pursue change to adapt to tomorrow's needs. Timing is everything. We must have the shrewd instincts to know when to lead the way with conviction and the wisdom to know when to pace ourselves with society's shifts. Streaming and bilingualism are two vividly contrasting examples. Dr. Goh and our pioneer leaders went ahead to implement streaming in 1979, even though it was not widely accepted by society. It would have been far more politically expedient not to do so, but it would have meant high levels of school dropouts and illiteracy. Ultimately, the entire education system and Singapore would have suffered. So we accepted the short-term trade-offs for the long-term gains. We transited to full subject-based banding when conditions were ready and our schools had the resources and capabilities to implement it on ground, to mitigate the stigmatization problem and to cater to the diverse learning needs of our students so that we no longer teach to the average of a child's ability, nor do we just teach to the average of a class abilities. On the other hand, we took a gradual approach to our language policy. Rather than immediately shutting down vernacular schools, we waited for the right conditions to develop. It took us almost 2 decades after introducing bilingualism before we finally implemented English as the main language of instruction in our schools. When we pursue system changes, we must also recognize that mindsets and culture must change in tandem for lasting impact. If we do not broaden our definitions of success beyond internal relativities, no extent of changes in the PSLE scoring system will ever reduce stress and help us appreciate and respect the diversity of talents. Neither will the removal of mid-year exams reduce students' pressure if we, as parents, power on what MOE reduces. And policy consistency and executional conviction will be key to this. Many countries fail not because they lack good ideas. Indeed, many could have even better ideas than we do. But they did not necessarily have the political continuity or stability to give their governments the space to see through the many tough but necessary policies and to reap the fruits to be born. All policies will have trade-offs, especially in the short term. There is no policy eternally relevant, no policy universally satisfactory. We must have the conviction to do the right thing for our people, even when it is unpopular or inconvenient in the short term. Consistency and commitment in execution over generations are critical to realizing the benefits of any good-intentioned policies. Third, we are only stronger together. Educators across MOE HQ, professional institutions, and schools must remain as one unified fraternity. It cannot, it must not, and it must never be the case where that only good teachers go to good schools, as in some other countries. Nor can we allow a divide between those making policies and educators who implement the policies on the front lines of our school. We must continue to foster mutual trust as well as to facilitate the flows of people, ideas, and best practices across our entire education system. This ensures that we never become stale and siloed, that our policies are well-informed, and when we level up, we do so together. That when an idea comes up from the ground, it will work its way across the entire system. There is no divide between MOE HQs and schools. But we cannot take this relationship between MOE, NIE, schools, and educators for granted. Looking around the world, it is not something that is easily found, and it can easily fracture, and we must guard and nurture it. Fourth, a societal's respect for educators determines the quality of our educators, which in turn shapes the quality of our education system and the future of our country. Educators are the backbone of our education system. Having educators who are deeply committed to education will always be one of Singapore's greatest strengths. Education is fundamentally a human endeavor. It is above and beyond the transmission of content, knowledge, and information. Education guides a population. It is the inculcation of values, life skills, national identity, and a sense of cohesion in our people, as Woon Chia said. Hence, no amount of funding or technology can replace the guidance and personal connections and commitments of our educators. Our attitude and behavior towards educators will determine the quality of people that will join us in educating our next generation, which will in turn determine the quality of our education system, the quality of our people, and the survival and success of our country. Last but not least, students are and always will be the heart of our education system. I visit schools regularly. Walking through our schools and seeing our students reminds me why we do what we do. When I look into the bright, expectant faces of our students, filled with hope and possibility, I see the progress we have made. But more importantly, the challenges that remain and the work which lies ahead. The work to ensure every student has access to education according to their respective needs, the work to instill strength of character, and the work to create an environment in which they may fulfill their aspirations. These are all the tasks before us. So, ladies and gentlemen, for the last 60 years, Singapore has survived and even thrived against the odds, steered by pioneers who envisioned a shared future, even if they did not share a common past. United by common ideals of meritocracy, incorruptibility, multiculturalism, and most fundamentally, a commitment to this island and its people. The education system that we built must not only seek to realize the fullest potential of each student, but must also imbue a sense of purpose that inspires them to contribute to Singapore and the gumption to continue defying the odds of history. We have done much, yet much more needs to be done. We are not the only ones striving to do better. We have had a strong head start, but other countries have greater resources, sheer population size, and many are increasingly bilingual. They are hungry to succeed and will steal our lunch, including dinner, if we are complacent. Much is at stake, much needs to be done, and we must not rest on our laurels. As our future educators and leaders, my hope is that you leave here today with a richer understanding of our education history and be ready to write the next chapter of our education history. You will be the architects of our nation's future, shaping not just minds, but also hearts and dreams. I hope you will keep your passion, idealism, and hope burning bright, invested in not just who our students are, but what they can become. You will be our leaders at SG100. You will ignite the spirit of a generation that will take us to SG100 and beyond. I look forward to you inspiring our children to keep defying the odds of history to bring Singapore to SG100 and beyond. Thank you, and I look forward to an enriching discussion with you.